Hi, my name is Nate Berkopec, and I'm here to talk about what I call a third way for open source. And it's somewhere between the extremes of all maintainers deserve to get paid a lot of money, and maintainers are on their own, and whatever happens, happens. And I'm talking about this today from my experience as the maintainer of a very popular open source project called Puma. You may also know me from my work under the Speed Shop, which is my performance consultancy for Rails applications. And that consultancy, I've written a couple of books about Ruby on Rails application performance. But this talk today is mostly about my open source work, which I do as part of my Speed Shop time. It's part of my workday. I spend 15 minutes per day on organizing Puma and maintaining Puma. I do it every single day. Every workday anyway, and it's been a part of my practice, and I've learned some stuff, and I want to share that today. So I wrote this talk as a response to what I felt is a lot of anxiety in the community around open source projects, and there's this idea that it's like this massive Jenga tower, and maintainers are overworked and not paid, and it's all going to come falling down eventually because we don't pay maintainers, or maintainers are overworked or overstressed. I haven't felt that way with Puma, and I think I found a way that works, and I want to share it. So why am I the maintainer of Puma? Well, I want to say this was a RailsConf, but I think it was actually a RubyConf. Evan Phoenix came up to me in a hallway and said to me and Richard Schneeman of Heroku, "Hey, do you want to maintain Puma?" Evan had started Puma, I think probably 5 or 6 years before that time. And we took over the maintenance of the project in 2016. It's been really fun. I've learned a lot. I knew nothing about Puma when I started. When Richard and I took over in 2016, there was kind of like a burst of activity, but you can see that kind of tapered off to sort of pretty low levels around late 2018. But in 2019, I started trying a different approach. And that's the third way that I want to talk about today. And since then, the contributions have been super healthy to Puma, and that growth in contributions is not from me. It's from a small handful of other contributors that who I did make it my job to find and to encourage, but it's not just me anymore. We've done tons of releases in that period of time. These are all the releases that have happened since Richard and I took over maintenance of the project. We have hundreds of millions of downloads, and that rate of downloads is increasing exponentially. Ever since we were made like the default server for Rails, Puma has become even more popular, and in that time we've become shipping even more, even faster. So we've definitely risen to the challenge of that project. My basic thesis here today is that the de jure OSS collaboration model is simply a byproduct of GitHub and its UI, and it artificially constrains the supply of maintainer labor. And I want to talk about some ways that we can subvert that model and try other things inside the GitHub system. And I also want to think creatively today about ways that we can go outside of the GitHub model. What if we didn't have GitHub? What if we reimagined the way that open source collaboration worked? So Nadia Eghbal's book, Working in Public, is kind of a must read for anybody thinking about this problem. And in that book, she lays out this idea that there are two markets for open source software. There's one, which is the bits and bytes of the actual software. And that's a non-rivalrous good. If you download Puma, it doesn't prevent me from downloading Puma. There's no competition for the underlying goods there. But maintainer attention is a rivalrous good. We all want the attention of a maintainer to work on our pet feature, but there's only so much maintainer attention. So if we think of this like a classic economist, like supply and demand curve, with our supply curve on the right here with maintainer attention and user requests on the left, we might think of like the x-axis here as the number of issues that maintainers can deal with, and the y-axis is the importance. So as demand increases, the amount of open issues will increase, and the importance of those issues that the maintainer can actually get to will be increased. So the maintainer can't get to lower priority issues. But that graph that I showed you kind of lies a bit, because it kind of makes it look like as we increase the user request demand curve, that maintainer attention increases. And that's not actually really the case in most projects. In most projects, maintainer attention is inelastic. No matter the popularity of the project or how many issues are opened, the amount of hours that a maintainer devotes to the project is going to stay the same. I want to say that this isn't applicable to services that we might think of as open source software, such as like rubygems.org. So rubygems.org is actually like an app that has to run somewhere on hardware. And those kinds of like services are not what I want to talk about today, because they're also they're also a rivalrous good, because if a lot of us start to download more rubygems.org stuff, then that actually creates more maintainer work. So we're not talking about services, we're talking about packages and libraries today. The other thing I'm not really here to talk about is an issue of equity or fairness. There's this maybe this idea that companies are making too much money off of the back of open source software, and I consider that a separate issue. What I really want to talk about today is this issue of, as projects become more popular, maintainer attention doesn't increase to compensate. And there's this backlog of issues and requests of the maintainer. And that's what I want to talk about today. So as usage increases, demands on maintainer attention increase. Now this kind of sounds like obvious, but if you think about it, it's sort of weird. Like, why is it that as more people download a package, that a maintainer has more demands on their time and attention? In other words, what do maintainers owe users? What is the duty of a maintainer to their users? Like, why should you even be able to open issues on a repository at all? Why do maintainers want to talk to you? In general, hopefully you'll help make the software better. And the only way that users really do that is by making a detailed and reproducible bug report. That usually helps maintainers, because it's like, oh, this is a problem in the software that I didn't know about. Here's the steps to fix it. Now I can go fix it if I want to. But this issue about like what maintainers owe users often gets really exaggerated in favor of the user. And I couldn't have asked for a better example for this than what happened last week with the MyMagic repository. Everybody's builds broke. Nobody could deploy because a maintainer of a small dependency of Rails got a legal request from somebody whose copyright was violated. There was a copyright violation in the library, and they said, please fix this. And the maintainer reacted by yanking all versions that had the copyright violation and releasing a new version that didn't have the violation. Imagine being the maintainer for a moment here. Someone opens this thread. They've instigated some legal action in the form of a DMCA notice before, and you're alone making this decision about what to do. It's a complex legal issue, and the only thing that you know will solve it will be giving into the demands of the copyright holder. What do you owe users at that moment? Do you owe them some kind of legal exposure to maybe fighting off a DMCA, or potentially even like worse legal threat from this copyright holder who, let's be honest, is 100% in the right? Like, that file is mislicensed. Like, there's no doubt about the facts here. We have this expectation of maintainers as like heroes for the user. I guess we have this idea that you already did one good thing for me by opening up this project to the world and letting me download it. So like, do one more thing. No one put up a copy of the old MyMagic repo with the copyright violation and said, hey, I have it here. Please download it here. But we all expected the current maintainer to do that for us. So we have these kind of crazy expectations about what maintainers are supposed to do for users. Usually we think about it in terms of, please implement this feature, please fix my bug. But really, users, they just take. They only give. They don't give. They generally don't further the project, and more usage does not really improve the project directly, outside of maybe weird projects with network effects where more usage builds the network. They often ask you things like, what's your plan? This is one that drives me crazy. What's your plan for fixing this problem that I have? Why haven't you done this? Why didn't you do this? Why did you do that? And it's always, what are you going to do for me to fix this grievance that I have? And most successful open source maintainers that stick around for a long time will tell you that you have to reset what you think you owe to users. Rich Hickey, the creator of Clojure, wrote in an essay online called Open Source is Not About You. If you have expectations of others that aren't being met, those expectations are your own responsibility. You are responsible for your own needs. If you want things, make them. If you are not an open source maintainer today, this is probably the best advice that I can give you as a user of open source to reduce the behavior of maintainers. Don't expect things. I personally on Puma view our issues list as a repository of information for future contributors. Like there's bug reports here, there's some things that people might like, but I don't see it as a backlog. I don't see it as a to-do list. I don't see it as things that I have to go get done. It's just, if I feel like contributing to Puma today, here's some things that people think would be useful. And if I feel like doing that, great. If I feel like doing something for myself, that's great too. I basically just restrict my interaction with users of Puma to labeling their issues, maybe helping them saying, hey, this isn't like a reproducible bug report. I need more information. And otherwise, I just put it in dev null. Like if it's a feature request, I basically just label it feature and never think about it ever again. If that person wants to implement that, or if someone else wants to come over and implement that, I think that's great. I'm leaving it up for them to do that. I think we could get more aggressive about how codes of conduct deal with expectations of users. Codes of conduct are designed to protect contributors and potential future contributors. And I can tell you there's really nothing more demoralizing than this kind of entitled attitude from users in terms of maintaining an open source project. And I think we could maybe do some more with our codes of conduct there. But more on that a little bit later. What I'm trying to get at here is that on the supply and demand side of this maintainer retention thing, only one side of that is valuable, and that's maintainer retention. And we need to protect what's valuable here. If one guy says something mean and gets pissed and I ban them from our project space, that doesn't really harm Puma at all. It might harm Puma, the maintainers, and the people that actually contribute. And if I didn't ban them, and that would be a bigger harm to the project as a whole. So I think we need to protect the valuable side of that equation. Now, as far as maintainer retention, probably the biggest proposed solution to this has been money. We could just pay maintainers and then that will solve this problem. The biggest initiative here has been Open Collective, which is a way for open source projects to collect money from their users. And they say right on the homepage here, it's about making the community sustainable. There's this idea that without money, the project is not sustainable. However, there's a problem with this. And it's particular to software engineers. We get paid a lot of money, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the amount of attention that I will give to a project for $10,000 a month even, it doesn't replace my full-time job. So I can't devote any more time to it. I'm still doing my 40 hours a week. So I don't have, that's not buying more time for me to work on the project. If you pay me as much as my full-time job, then I would quit and do this. But it's not a perfect analogy, as some people might think, to like Twitch and Patreon. Like people look at Twitch and Patreon, they're like, oh, there's tons of money here. We can do this with open source. But people on Twitch and Patreon are happy making $40,000 a year, and they probably already are working on their project full-time anyway. The opportunity costs for some creators on these platforms is so much lower than the opportunity cost for a typical software engineer. So your dollar goes a lot less far. And plus, it takes a lot of popularity to even get dollars in open source. The Linux Foundation, which is like the most popular piece of software in the world, gets $16 million a year in membership fees. But the Django Foundation gets $200,000 a year. Ruby Together gets $200,000 a year. And like critical projects, but that are nonetheless small by these standards, get like $3,000 a year, like RVM. Not everyone can become a bundler or a Django. And even then, it doesn't support a full-time developer. So the supply of money in OSS is plentiful. Like there's companies with tons of money. There's developers, which use your software, which also objectively have a lot of money. But we're asking maintainers to A, become salespeople, and B, sell something that they already gave away for free, which is their labor. And that's a tall order for a lot of people. Most people can't build that kind of organization to collect that money and sell people on this project. It also just builds up this mentality of maintainers as cowboy coders or cowgirl coders, that they're the only ones that can save us. And it's just up to them. And they're the only people that can maintain this project, which isn't true. And I think it also contributes to new contributors thinking, well, why should I contribute if person X is getting paid $300,000 a year? Like, well, they got it under control and they're getting paid a lot of money, so they don't need my help. I think that any solution to this problem has to acknowledge that there is a massive supply of free software labor that is being given freely on the internet. But we just need to accept it. We need to design our projects so that they are as contributor friendly as possible. I don't believe that they currently are. Also, I think that working together creates better software. I think my best and favorite example of this is the 2008 MERB Rails merge. So Yehuda Katz, like for some egoless, incredible reason, decided to sacrifice his project to Rails, and it made Rails so much better. Like Rails 3 became the amazing, like genre-defining release that it was because it got a lot of the modularity and like underlying beauty that MERB had. And Rails would not be anywhere near what it is today without that selfless act from Yehuda. And it just made Rails so much better. Would we have done that if like Yehuda was pulling in $200,000 a year for his project? I don't know. So let's think about what maintainership actually means. A lot of people think it's just writing code, but it's also writing docs, issue triage, code review, putting out regular releases, controlling what goes on the master branch, vision and direction of the project, and like enlisting more help, especially in areas where you don't understand stuff like security, for example. Only 3 of these things need like what I call green button control, which is just commit bit on GitHub. 4 of these things anyone can do on any project without the approval of the maintainer. You can open PRs, you can write docs, you can do issue triage. And another thing, if you're not a maintainer, do this stuff. You don't need to ask the maintainer. It will help them, and you don't even need to go ask them like, hey, should I review this PR? It will help them. Go do it. So solution number 1 is not thinking of the maintainer as someone who has to do all of these jobs, but instead to break up the work of maintainership of a project and allow people to contribute purely in non-code writing areas. A lot of open source projects already do this. Out of all my solutions, this is probably the most widely already adopted. A lot of projects have issue teams, docs teams, or release managers that do just one part of this equation. I would say make these things formal if you don't have them already. Have a formal issue team. Say, hey, person Y, please be my docs team. You can start this project, you can recruit new people. And one area that's maybe not done as much, I think that should be done more, is a new contributor team that has the job of finding and recruiting contributors and, most importantly, getting them set up, like getting on a Zoom call and helping them get the test suite to run for the first time. One of my favorite contributors to Puma, Dentarg, named one of our releases Fettisdagbula, which is like some kind of Swedish pastry thing, I don't know. But Dentarg doesn't contribute code to Puma. He contributes PRs and issue a lot of triage in the issues, and I love him for it. Like, it's amazing the amount of work that he takes off of everyone else's plate, so that they can do the other stuff that they feel that they enjoy doing more. So my other solution is that the most valuable work that you can do as a maintainer is to recruit other maintainers. We often talk about like the 10x coder. I think this is one place where it can be literally true. As a maintainer, I can be a 10x maintainer if I recruit 9 other people to come do the work of maintainership. I can literally bring 10 times the amount of person hours into the project if I concentrate my work on bringing in more contributions. And the first thing you can do to do this is to have a project that's easy to contribute to. Having a good test suite, having code styles, having a contributor.md file, having office hours for potential new contributors, having a chat channel for new contributors. I'm hard to get to for users of Puma, but if you want to contribute to Puma, I am open to you. Like if you want to book 30 minutes with me to talk about something you can't get the test to run, I'm happy to do that. But if you want to talk to me for 30 minutes about why your Puma install doesn't work, like, sorry, it doesn't help anybody, so I can't do that. I see my job as being like a gardener, to find people who could be good contributors to Puma and to grow them into what I call a super contributor, which is somebody who contributes a lot, more than like once a week or something at Puma scale would be a super contributor to me. I think we're often really dismissive of potential new contributors. And we say, well, they only submit these patches that are halfway done or whatever. That's your fault, I think. I think we have to take more responsibility for why our project is hard to contribute to. Also, we liberally pass out commit bits at Puma. You know, if you bring in like 5 commits that are solid, I will give you commit bit, you know, or I'll push for it at least. But we don't give out release privileges. So we maintain security and trust in the library by everything being still reviewed and signed off by a very limited set of release managers, which is basically just myself and Richard. So I think a lot about why don't people contribute, or why are their contributions bad? You know, if somebody's contribution requires a lot of effort from me in order to put on a master, I don't see that as a burden. I see that as an investment. I see that as, okay, I'm going to help this person get this over the line, and I want to make sure that they have a good experience, that they will come back and do more pull requests. And honestly, that's worked really well. Think about, why do people contribute to a open source project? I think a lot of people do it for fun. It's fun to code. A lot of people do it for status. They like the idea of being on a core team and being able to talk about that in conferences and on their resume. And a lot of people do it to be a part of a community. This picture is of VLC, which if you've ever been to FOSDEM, like they all run around with their little hats on with the cones. And it seems like it'd be awesome to be a VLC contributor, you know? Like it seems like they all really enjoy working with each other. And in Puma, like I give out like a lot of status. I give out a lot of rewards, and it's all made up, and the points don't matter. And you know, I will call you core team. You know, if you got a commit bit, you're core team. And if you do 5 commits, yeah, you're core team now. And or you want to be the techno king of Puma. Like, okay, great. Like you're the techno king now. You know, it's all this little stuff that sounds kind of stupid, but it's actually really fun for people. And so we do named releases in Puma. That's been a big tradition for us. I instituted this process where if you put a lot of commits into a certain Puma release, I'll let you name it. And that's the code name that shows up in the logs. And we've had like 5 or 6 people name releases right now, and everybody is so honored actually by that ability, because it shows up in everybody's logs in Puma, and it's like, you know, everybody sees like your name that you put in the Puma logs. We have a chat channel. And finally, you know, as part of this, for my third solution, protect maintainer attention. Go to bat for contributors and moderate aggressively. Any open source maintainer will tell you that the worst part is dealing with users that are assholes. And part of what you can do as a maintainer is to block those kinds of assholes from getting to the other contributors. Like, make yourself the sort of like Tasmanian devil that will go after assholes on your project and moderate them aggressively. Contribution, again, is more important than anything else. And the purpose of a project space is to encourage contribution. You're not a servant to your users, you're a servant to the project. And anything that inhibits contribution to the project should be removed. It's not a free speech zone. It's about what can we put here that will encourage more future contributors. And people being assholes and even like mildly mean is not going to help. So I aggressively moderate and hide comments that are not helpful. Finally, this is where I want to get a little bit weird and like think outside the box a little bit. I think we should kill the maintainer monopoly enforced by our tools. And what do I mean by maintainer monopoly? On GitHub, the maintainer, or whoever has commit bit, has a monopoly on what code gets to go on the main branch. And this is just sort of an artifact of how GitHub works. Like, your GitHub page is your username / the project name, right? So like GitHub thinks you own the project space. So that's cool. I mean, I'm fine with that. But then we sort of like equivocate that project space with the only legitimate project space for this project. It's the original one from the original maintainer or whoever they designate. And it's just so weird. Like, how is there a monopoly on a copyleft piece of intellectual property? It says right in the license, anybody can copy this and do whatever they want with it. But somehow the responsibility for the project ends up being one person, and no one can take that responsibility away from them either. Like, you can't elect a new maintainer. If the maintainer quits, or just like ghosts, what do? There's no recourse for taking a project off of somebody who decides they don't want to maintain it anymore, which is awesome and fine, by the way. I'm not saying maintainers shouldn't quit, but if they do, how can the community decide, well, here's now the new space where we are going to collaborate? And this is really just an artifact of GitHub's UI here for forking. There's really no way for a project space to say, hey, this is this project, but there's a fork over here which has more contributors, more community uptake, more downloads. Maybe you want to go check out this one. Or the community voted that they're all going to move over here. There's no way to do that. So forking ends up being this like kind of catastrophically difficult thing. Like it's actually harder to fork an existing project than it is to start a completely new one. It's harder for somebody to fork Puma than it would be for someone to start a new Ruby web server that did the exact same thing. To think about this a little bit differently, think about how Wikipedia works. Nobody owns a Wikipedia page. No one owns the page for spaceships. The person that created that page does not own the Wikipedia page in any sense. They don't get to decide what edits go on the page and which ones don't. The page belongs to Wikipedia. It doesn't belong to the project, to the maintainer or to the original author. And in some sense, that's only possible because of the license under which these Wikipedia pages are written. So you can either, Wikipedia is dual licensed under CC attribution share alike or the GFDL, the GNU free documentation license. And really these licenses aren't any different. And in some cases are actually more restrictive than open source software licenses. So like what would a project collaboration space look like if we didn't say the maintainer owned the project space? There's just really no way to bring any kind of legitimacy to a fork unless the original maintainer says this is now the legitimate fork. And I think that's probably a misalignment. Users just want a project that is well maintained. They don't actually care in most cases if it's the original maintainer's project or if it's a community project or if it's maintainer B's project. They should have that choice, but usually what they care about is a well-maintained project over a certain person's project. It's kind of all about the relationship between like what is the software project and what is like the place where we collaborate on that project. It's a hard problem to solve. I'm not sure if it's even solvable with software, but really we have no way to signal right now which project spaces are legitimate and which ones are not, except for the original author says this is or this is not. I think one place we could improve this, at least in the Ruby ecosystem, is by namespacing our releases. So on rubygems.org, the package name is just the package name. It's kind of like the old Debian, whatever package repositories. Some other package managers allow you to make that a tuple. So like the first part is the user organization and the last part is the project name. And I think this is a better way of thinking about it. Like you're not using Puma, you're using the Puma Teams version of Puma. And there are other versions of Puma. Really, I just think that there should be a way for us to elect new maintainers or to like mainline community forks and say, this is the real fork that we all agree on. Currently, there's just no way to vote on that. People should maintain, the ability to use the old version, right? Like I'm not saying that someday everyone should wake up and Puma on RubyGems should point to some other repository. And I realize that there will be some downsides to this. Like I don't want to see software designed by committee. I don't want people to have like hostile takeovers of their projects. I don't want anyone to like be able to take over Puma because they got enough votes or whatever. But I do think that we should have clearer signaling mechanisms here that allow the community to say, here's a project that's actively maintained and here's the same project in a different space that isn't. So I don't know what this could look like. So just to recap some of my solutions here today. Solution 1, parcel up the work, encourage contribution in non-code writing areas. Have a docs team, have an issues team, have a new contributors team. All the different work that you don't want to do maybe that's not code writing, make that a job, write it in your README, and officially give it to someone else. There are people out there that want to do that stuff. It's weird, I know, to think that some people enjoy writing docs or enjoy doing issue triage, but some people really do. Solution 2, the most valuable work you can do as a maintainer is to recruit other maintainers. If you're struggling in your project, if you are feeling overwhelmed by the amount of user demand on your time, you need to find help. You need to find more maintainers. And there's a lot of different ways we talked about in this talk to do that. But just trying to stay on top of the issues by yourself is not a sustainable solution. Solution number 3 is to be aggressive about protecting maintainer intention. When you have a trade-off or some kind of gray area between quote unquote free speech and maintaining a space where people feel excited about contributing to a project, you need to err on the side of maintaining contributor and maintainer attention, maintaining a fun space where everyone wants to contribute to your project. If people want to be users and assholes, they can just be users and they can't hang out in your project space. Solution number 4, some way of killing the maintainer monopoly that's enforced by our tools. Finding ways to bless community forks, bless different project spaces, to say, hey, this project space is where this is happening, but there's a lot of activity happening over here on the same project in a different space, maybe on a different fork. We don't have good ways of doing that on GitHub, so I'm interested in ways we can figure that out. And kind of what I'm talking about here is if you feel overwhelmed by a project or if a maintainer is overwhelmed by a project, you should be more of a community leader and not so much a coder. I think a lot of the problems here arise from this idea that maintainers should just be free to code in their project all day and they don't have to work with anybody else if they don't want to, and they should be paid for that. I think if you want resources from the community, you should ask for them. And one of the best resources we have right now is free labor. It's free software labor. People will contribute to your project. So if you don't want people to contribute to your project, that's your choice. But if you're feeling overwhelmed, there's help. You just need to know how to get it. So these are all the photos from my talk. Thank you for listening. And I'm Nate Berkopec on Twitter, and I'll see you around.